opportunity the administration is putting forward to solicit feedback from the community on these conditional use rules?
No, in fact, I believe this afternoon we went live with the Open City Hall topic, which is essentially a digital open house version of what we're doing at those workshops. And then we've been talking internally about what is next. I don't anticipate that we will go straight from those workshops to the Planning Commission. I think that there will be something. I don't know what that is yet. Obviously, we have a certain time frames we have to meet, but we do want to have some sort of response back and opportunity to respond to our response.
So, Nick, I wanted to just do a little bit of a follow-up on both. First, how are you ensuring that those 14 criteria move forward in the process, and how do people, what's the mechanism for adding more? Is it the workshop process? Is it Open City Hall? I mean, what's the opportunity for the planning department to evaluate and add, or at a minimum sort of ensure that we're seeing those baselines?
So when we think about adding something additional, I'm assuming you're talking to the detrimental impact section of the conditional use process.
I don't know, Aaron, is that what you were referencing?
11th and 18th workshop intentions?
Yes.
Well, I've heard a couple of hopeful outcomes, and that the conditional use feedback is part of the work of the workshops.
So let me clarify in that the conditional use specific types of things are down the road. What we want to do with these workshops is to identify the issues so that we can write the zoning rules that would apply to the use, regardless of whether they're conditional uses or not. These are rules, they're a set of rules, however long they may be, and however long they need to be to address the issues. Those rules apply no matter what. And when we get to the conditional use process, part of that process is making sure that each of those rules has been complied with.
And you start with those existing conditional use criteria for mitigation, and you may expand this, or they may get written into the zoning process.
They will more than likely be written into the rules that are specific to this use. One of the problems with adding additional detrimental impacts to all conditional uses is that they end up maybe starting to apply to other uses which really don't have the same type of issues and concerns, and so we want to balance that out. And so our approach is that it's better to identify those rules that are specific to this kind of a use in a separate section, knowing that the conditional use stuff over here also is going to apply.
And so could you talk a little bit, Nick, about the workshops, when you're hosting them, and what your sort of format and expectation is from those?
So we have a very basic format because of the number of people that we expect and just the sheer limited staff resource that we have to do this. We really we've designed these so that when people come, they can orient themselves to the locations. They can see a list of identified issues. They can add to that list if they want, and then they can also provide us with some, if they want to, some solutions to some of those issues, so that we can take those things and start working them into those rules. We will have staff there that are explaining that to people, that are helping them understand the list of issues and the list of rules we have in the process. We'll have graphics available, but we also have to be cognizant of, we could have 10 staff there and 150 people there all wanting answers. And so we want to be flexible enough that we can do that. And it may be that we have to kind of stop every 15 minutes or so and make an announcement and explain what we're trying to get out, so the people who are filtering in can get that. We know it's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a challenging environment, but we think that we can do that. And our goal is to help people understand the long-term process of these, and get their input on what their issues are, so that then we can start collecting that and working with it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Lisa.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, or maybe David does. With the workshops we're having tomorrow and on the 18th, are we including that, like those 14 things, so people can see that starting there, or will
We're
it just be
not.
separate?
We're not, and the reason we're not is because we don't want to predetermine necessarily what those issues are, and we also know that those list of detrimental impacts isn't going to cover every concern, and so we want to know what all the concerns are first, and then we can start to figure out, okay, we already have this addressed here, here, and here. That's our response back. But if we need to add some additional rules, that's what we want to know, and so that's how we're doing it.
Aaron?
I just wanted to say that in all that we're going through as a city and as elected people, I have great confidence in our planning department being ready to deal with this. And kudos to you, Nick, and your team. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I've been impressed with the planning that you've done in the planning department for this. And I'll be at, I hope, most of the workshops. See you guys in action.
Great.
Nothing like starting right off, huh? Yeah. Cindy?
Maybe it's not necessary to clarify this, but I wanted to double check. There's the piece of this that's the administrative that Nick described, and I couldn't tell Councilmember Mendenhall if you were asking that we, as council staff, get involved early in that process, or that if we just keep communication lines open.
Definitely don't duplicate work. Keep communication lines open.
Okay, and we will not, the healthiest thing to do, which we figured out with our audit a few years ago, is for us to drive people, give them the information they need to get them into the administrative process, so that people are not choosing between one and the other, but participating in both. So, keep communication lines open, and also, if it's okay, we'll almost promote their process so that the public is aware of that, and then have a robust process on our end too.
Great.
Does that make sense?
And I think that communication with the public, we will have people participating who probably never participated before in city government, and helping them to understand that by driving them to the administrative process, really it's coming to us, that they, communicating
Right.
the system.
Right, and we want them to get their input in early,
Yeah.
so that it can be refined as part of that public process. And
Thank you.
just double checking. Thanks.
Any additional questions for Nick in the process that they're initiating starting tomorrow afternoon? Yes, Andrew.
Quick question. Could you give us maybe a preview of what someone who walks into the workshop is going to expect to see? What's the experience?
From beginning to end?
Just so we can clarify the expectations coming into these workshops tomorrow.
Yeah, so basically when somebody shows up, they'll be greeted at the door. We'll get some contact information. They'll receive some kind of a handout that has some information in it, and then there'll be kind of a general information section where there's some poster boards that talk about. I mean, maybe I should let Noel talk about this part, but you're doing a great job. Okay, great. Thanks, Noel. So that people can find out some information about how we got to where we are. The different pieces of the process, and, lack of a better term, the model that we keep hearing about. And then there'll be a section where there's various city staff and I believe some council staff to field those general questions, and those are the things where people who may be upset about the process and how we got to where we are and those types of things. One of the goals of that is to kind of filter that discussion from coming down to the planners, primarily because the planners haven't been involved in that, right? And their job really is to help identify the issues. And so then they'll be able to move on to, we will have 4 different stations, one for each of the 4 sites that has the general characteristics of the site, a map of the site, list of issues, like I said, the process. These will be broken down, so they'll be individually catered to each of the 4 sites. And then an opportunity to leave comments, to take information with them and provide comments through another avenue if they choose. And then the role of each, we'll have as many staff people as we can, with the idea that we'll have staff centered at each of the 4 stations who can answer questions, who can help them work through maybe some of their ideas and some of their issues, and to really encourage people to write them down. One of our goals is and outcomes is that we can demonstrate to the communities what comments we heard and how those have influenced the direction that we're going. That's one of our big outcomes from this.
Thank you very much.
Additional questions? No, you got off easy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're here to support planning largely.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Russell, before you go, and David, if you have an opportunity, if you wouldn't mind joining us up here at the table. The administration has been working on a memorandum of understanding, which is an administrative function with the county, outlining some of the services and agreements, our relationship basically with the county in this process. And I know you just barely got this, and it's a draft, and I want to thank David for getting it over to our office today. And I'm wondering if, David, you could just take a minute and highlight this perhaps and let us know where this is in process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've asked, Jen's reaching out to Lynn as well. Lynn Pace has helped draft and negotiate with the county on that. So just, sorry, I'm just pulling it up on my computer. So what?
And actually just starting with just a little background, because I don't think everyone's aware of what this process is. And
so as we were proceeding through, oh, thank you, I have it right here too. As we were proceeding through the site selection process and the conversations with the county around programs and services and where certain responsibilities and roles lie, there had been discussion between the administration and the council about drafting either an interlocal or an MOU to lay out some of those agreements. And so several months ago, we began that process of crafting an agreement between the 2 mayors on that. What we had not probably discussed with the council, that's also incorporated a new component that came up, was around the architectural design. And so part of, council member, to your question, Mr. Chair, part of the agreement lays out the design process. There had been some discussion about whether the architectural process would be led, would go through the city process or possibly through a process through the Shelter the Homeless Committee. And quite frankly, the administration felt pretty strongly that we should utilize the city process in selecting the architect and going through the architectural design. And so we created a process with the county, collaborative process with the county, other stakeholders, the chairs of the Site Selection Commission, the representatives from the collective impact process, to help guide both the selection of the architect as well as a design review team. And so that is laid out in the agreement as well as such components as the reimbursement for the land cost, the agreement that has been discussed a lot about who actually would own the facilities. And because of the timing and in the anticipation that the city may, as we did with the RDA funding, actually purchase the properties prior to transfership of ownership, we wanted to include that. I know that was something that was also very important to the county. So those are some of the basic, and then you can see that before you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
can
Lisa.
I ask David a question? Is this memorandum of understanding, the draft, available for the public to see?
Has not been, no.
And this is, it's still in a negotiation phase with the
Yes.
county, is that correct?
Yes, so the current status is Mayor Biskupski has approved this draft, the initial draft. We provided it to the county, I want to say a week or two. I can't remember if it was, I think that was prior to the holidays last year, the end of last year, and are waiting for approval from the county or additional input or feedback.
Thank you.
I will say in terms of the architectural component, and the reason why I was hoping Lynn would be here is there's a lot of the discussions that Lynn had directly with the county. I was more involved with the conversations with the county around the architect, and because of the timing on that, what is contained in the agreement, the written agreement, was what the county and the city discussed and agreed to verbally, that allowed us to move the architectural process forward.
Aaron.
David, I'm sorry if you already mentioned this, but did the city draft this MOU?
With county input.
Okay, and I had a question somewhere in here. I thought that was really interesting wording on the first page in the highlighted section about no more than capacity for 150 individuals. And I guess
Say that, I'm sorry.
it says in the context of one of the points that the new facilities have no more than capacity for 150 individuals, which is the 150 cap we've talked about for a long time. And I guess I'm just making a comment that the language is interesting, and there's usually some interesting reason for legal language that Margaret can explain to us later, I'm sure. But when we look at the evolution of the road home and what its capacity was originally envisioned and what its current capacity actually is, there's definitely, anyway, in the future, when we can get down to the brass tacks of this, I'd like to know more about why we worded it that way, because I don't think we've ever said it that way in our discussions about that.
And I know that council members are disadvantaged since this just showed up at your spots at the beginning of this meeting, but I'm sure David would welcome conversation about the specifics of this. And again, it's a draft. We're waiting for a response from the county. It's very possible and probably likely they'll have some changes or additions or something, modifications to it.
I just wanted to thank them also that I see that the specific city council member for the district in which each of the resource centers are located will be a part of the project design team that has discretion to approve or reject final design for the facilities. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the mayor brought that up, felt very strongly that on that point.
Thanks.
Any additional questions, comments, Andrew?
One of the points in here is that land I think we can do acquisition and some land use work, but we can't do construction until the third party takes ownership of the properties. Is that accurate as I read it in this draft?
Yeah, I would say one exception to that we may need to tinker with
First
a little
South
bit is
property?
the First South property, yeah.
But otherwise, that third party's got to be set up and ready to take ownership before we can construct anything. Is that accurate?
Right.
Okay.
Derek?
So, let's see, on page 3, it says city and county agree that both parties desire that the road home facility located at 210 South Rio Grande will cease operating as a homeless shelter after all 4 of the new resource centers have been constructed and operating. Are you really comfortable saying that?
Derek, tell me where you're at, will you?
Page 3,
Thanks.
right above operation.
Catch.
Towards the bottom, it's third up from the bottom on page 3.
That, yeah, thank you, I'm sorry, I was looking at page 2. That was, yes, I mean, that is the agreement. That was the understanding that we had with the council in selecting the 4 sites. That is the purpose of the agreement with the Shelter of the Homeless Committee on the land swap. That is also part of the conversation about the work that the county is leading on the prevention and diversion that we're all doing around affordable housing and really reducing the demand for shelter, which obviously the new resource centers are part of that, and individuals flowing through to meet best practices, as well as understanding that as both the city, the administration, and I think the council together have been saying is that it is also time for other municipalities to step up and participate as well.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not comfortable with that language there, and I don't remember, I don't recall that when the council provided feedback on the sites that the larger chunk of sites that the mayor selected. I don't remember that being a part of our discussions, but what I do remember is conversations that have been ongoing about the overall realignment of the system to draw down the population, but without a real plan in place for how we're going to get to the affordable housing needs that we have, without a plan in place, I just can't imagine that this is good policy for us to tie ourselves like this. I don't want 3 shelters in District 4 by any means. You know, I don't want to have First South, 7th South, and Rio Grande open, but this doesn't make sense to me. So that's a huge concern for me.
Sure, I would remind the council member that initially, the initial plan was to, and maybe hopefully, the initial plan was to actually rebuild, or the initial agreement was to rebuild on the 4th site, be the current facility. And when approached by one of the council members with some concerns about the timing of that, and some discussion of the 648 West 100 South site as an alternative, that is where discussion occurred around the land swap and the agreement that the current facility would close once the 4 resource centers were built.
I guess I'm just really concerned that we want to put this into this MOU, and I don't know what my colleagues feel about that, but.
So we should probably make a clarification here, Derek. MOU is an administrative process, and so David has shared this with us. An interlocal is absolutely a policy process that we would have to vote on and sign. So this is different, and I don't know if you had a discussion, David, about either or. We didn't. I don't think we set a direction for that, but they are 2 different types of documents. Lynn, could you address that? Are you prepared to address that? Why an MOU and not an interlocal?
If you could restate the question.
Why an MOU rather than an interlocal? Because I think both were options.
Yes, and I don't know, I mean, between the city and the county, I don't know that we ever got that far as to how this was going to be adopted or memorialized. It was, and I think I haven't been privy to all of your conversation today, but in prior meetings we had talked about a number of elements of this agreement between the city and the county that we thought everybody agreed to but had never been memorialized, like we're not going to convey the property until we get paid, things like that. And so we started to put those in writing, and over time more and more of those began to accumulate. And so finally we asked the attorney's office to put this into a document. We shared it with the county, and anyway, so I don't know that either side has determine how this is going to get memorialized.
So at this point, is it safe to say this is a...
Are we really all on the same page on these terms,
Okay.
yes or no?
All right. So is it safe to say this is a draft agreement of some sort?
Yes.
We don't know if it's an MOU or an interlocal at this point?
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't
That's
know,
good to
I don't
know.
know how the city would propose to adopt or how the county would propose to adopt.
Okay. Great. Any sense of a timeline on this? I mean, what there are some things in here that have been parts of discussions we've had, there are some new things in here that probably this is the first place they've been captured. Any sense of your timeline on this?
Yes, we forwarded this to the county. I think it was, I'm just trying to look back. I think it was before the holidays.
That would align with what David has
Yeah,
suggested.
it was December 22nd, and then, given the mayor's circumstances with her father's passing, everything sort of went on hold over the holidays.
Okay.
So I have reached back to the county to say, are we okay with this, yes or no? I don't know if they were waiting for us to give confirmation that the mayor had approved it. She has.
Okay.
But we have not yet closed that loop.
So at this point, is it safe to say this is still a fluid document and that you're open to input, questions,
Yes,
comments?
and that was the whole purpose of the document, was to put in writing what we thought everyone had agreed to. If there are substantive disagreements in there, we want, on our side or their side, we want to know that, and to put any of those uncertainties arising out of those elements to bed. But that's why this document has continued to grow over time, because we shifted first from the site selection process now to the architectural process. And I assume there will be more as we move forward.
Mr.
But
Chair,
that was the purpose of the document.
Yes, Aaron.
will we have another chance to give feedback on this before we're presented with a final that the county has approved?
Well,
So
again, I don't know that I don't know that I'm the point person, but whatever it is we agree to, you know, on the county side and the city side, we can put into writing and everyone can sign that, and I'm setting aside whatever the process is, right? But the two parties agreeing, you know, the next week or the next month, there will be new issues that arise. And so it's a matter of sort of capturing those and memorializing them, but that's not all of the issues forever. There's going to be more as we
Right,
move
but
forward.
Lynn, we just got this.
Yeah.
We
So-
have not looked at this, and many times in my short time on the council, we have had interlocals with the county come up that are time sensitive. They've approved it. If we want to make a change, which we sometimes have wanted to make a change, it is begrudgingly accepted that we need to make a change. So I just want to be clear about when we actually have time to look at this and give feedback. And if this
And
is
again,
it, then we need more
I don't know
time.
what discussion you had before I walked in the room, but hopefully 98% of this is stuff we've already talked about and stuff that we've discussed that we hope will be confirmed, because that's our understanding. The only sensitivity that I'm aware of relative to timing is that it would be to our advantage to confirm to outsiders, most specifically the legislature, that the city and the county are in fact on the same page when we go up and ask for the next tier of funding.
Then let me just mention my 2%, which is what Councilmember Kitchen brought up, that I would prefer that at the end of that, where there's a period right now, there be an addition of language by the county that reflects what Mayor McAdams told the council last week about analysis, data analysis, collection of information that would substantiate the closure of the road home, and that the road home would not be closed until sufficient analysis and data collection had shown that it could be closed.
And that's very possibly something that could come back from the county as well. So I think it's important that I again make this clarification. MOU is traditionally an administrative process, and the council would not even see it in some settings. So the administration has shared this as a courtesy. It's still fluid. We still have an opportunity to provide feedback, and an interlocal is something that would absolutely require a vote and approval of the council to move forward. So there's a distinction between those two documents, and I want to make sure everybody's clear about that. Yes, Andrew.
Going back to the point, though, that with an MRU, I think the language is very important, and the language in here is the desire of both is for this. I think we're looking for a shared direction. I agree with the direction. If the specifics are how we decide when that happens, we can get into that, but I'll just assume here a little bit, my assumption is a lot of people have looked at this very closely with some language, and desire was chosen in a very specific way. To say, here's the direction we intend, but there's probably some conditions you're talking about that I agree with. So I don't have a problem with that language and this direction we're moving to try and get a shared template to work off of together, so we hopefully avoid some of the other issues we've had so far. At least the
And if I
big
might
disagreements.
add, this document, as I mentioned, this is sort of a fluid discussion, and David knows this better than I do, but if you look at the last paragraph before the heading where it says operation, you'll see that paragraph that says the city and county agree and we desire that the current facility will cease operating. That statement was a reflection of the statements made at the press conference when we announced the 4 sites, right? So it was putting in writing what our understanding was on that day. Now, I haven't been part of that, but I understand there's been some evolution of that dialogue, and maybe there are refinements that need to be introduced in that paragraph that didn't exist on the day we drafted it. But the whole concept of this document, as Andrew was just mentioning, is we keep saying the county's going to do X, the city's going to do Y, and we agree, and the city's going to do Z. We want to put that in writing so that there's no miscommunication, there's no misunderstanding, and if there are frictions, they're identified so we can address and resolve them. You're raising questions about how this gets adopted, and those are all legitimate, but those are probably, at least as of the drafting of this document, our concern was not how do we formalize it, it's do we or do we not have an agreement on these terms.
And at this point, you still don't know from the county
I
if
have
they're on
not
the
heard
same
back,
page.
although I will tell you this was drafted with their input.
Okay.
Now, maybe they will object to some of the way it's worded or phrased, as we say, it's a moving target, but my expectation is that they'll be okay with all of this. If they're not, we'll want to know that and we'll want to address those issues.
So we really appreciate you sharing this with us today. I'm hearing from you that you're willing to take comments, ongoing comments, and I hope you share the evolution of this as well. And I want to say, David is nodding, yes. Lisa.
Just one comment from me, and I'm probably all alone on this, but I feel like I still want to share it with you, and that is the part that talks about the size of the resource centers, no more than 550. Right now, with 4, we're able to go to 600. If we do 150, do that math, you can do that. As you know, I have suggested perhaps we ought to think of going to 3 shelters, taking Simpson off the list, which would mean that one of the other shelters would have to be more than 150. And I don't know that I want to necessarily tie our hands. I don't want anything more than 200. I know there's concern among my colleagues. We've talked about that. We're not seeing eye to eye on that, but I still want to put that out there as a possibility. And I think 200 is a far cry from the 380 where we started it at the road home. And I think that we also recognize we want to be careful where we would put the larger shelter, and it would be 50 people more. It could be 50 kids. I don't know. I just want to throw that out there.
Can I, Mr. Chair, if I could just quickly respond. So I'm not good at math, but I'm also not that bad. The 550 comes from the agreement between the administration and the council that there would be 4 resource centers, max capacity of 150, overall capacity 550. So that's where the 550 comes from.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing this with us. We'll revisit this again. Council members, we have a standing briefing on homeless issues going forward in our next foreseeable meetings. We are going to take just a short break. Let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll reconvene. Again. Our next item on the agenda is the Northwest Quadrant update, and excuse me, I apologize, I jumped ahead. The next item on the agenda is an East Bench Master Plan update. So we'll be joined by Nick Tarbett, Nick Norris, and Wayne Mills. Are you taking the lead on this, Nick?
I'm punctual, let's go.
We're seeing a lot of you today.
All day long.
It's not, I wasn't a complaint, it was just an observation. So,
It could be a complaint.
so
might
I'll
share it.
go to Nick Tarbett first, who will say, I'm just gonna let Nick Norris introduce this, I'm pretty sure.
If it's all right with the chair, I'll let Wayne Mills introduce
Oh, Wayne,
it.
look at that. I was wrong. I'm trying to predict our staff and I'm wrong. So Wayne, welcome.
Thank you.
Lead it. I think you're gonna need to pull that mic as close as you can. Or scoot or something. It doesn't want to be very flexible.
Well, thank you very much. Here to talk about a project that's been long in the works. This is the East Bench draft master plan being presented to the City Council along with the Parley's Way corridor plan. The East Bench planning area is the easternmost planning area in the city. It is bounded by the northern extent of the University of Utah to the north, the western on the western boundaries, 1300 East and University Street. To the south, 1700 South, to 23rd East to Parley's Way, and the eastern extent is the eastern city boundaries. The existing East Bench Master Plan was adopted in 2011, so it's one of the older, I'm sorry, not 2011, 1987. So it's been one of the older master plans in the city. Yeah, that's true. In 2011, the Planning Division identified the East Bench Plan as the next to be updated. And at that same time, the City Council, in working with the East Bench community, allocated money to develop specific plans for both Parley's Way and Foothill Drive. So what I'd like to do in the briefing is just give an overview of how we developed the plan, and then just a very brief plan summary. It's a long, in-depth plan, and in the consideration of time, we'll go through an overview. The plan started with a visioning process where we met in the community. We had a number of stakeholder meetings. We gathered over 700 comments related to what members of the community value, their issue areas, and what they would like to see in the future. What this led to was the formulation of opportunities, challenges, vision statements, and focus areas. The focus areas were used as a starting point for developing a very in-depth East Bench existing conditions report. Utilizing the data from the existing conditions report and the comments received through additional public engagement activities, the project team refined the vision statements, developed guiding principles and initiatives that support the vision statements, as well as other citywide policies. At about that same time, the plan team initiated the Parley's Way corridor plan, where we contracted with consultants, conducted 3 open house meetings and an online survey throughout that plan process. And then utilizing the vision statements and the guiding principles from the East Bench that were developed through the East Bench planning process, developed the draft Parley's Way corridor plan. And then we'll get into that here in a little bit. Finally, the project team developed and formatted the draft East Bench master plan and began a public engagement process for both the East Bench plan and the Parley's Way plan. It involved individual meetings with all the stakeholders involved throughout the process, community councils, neighborhood organizations, and we held an open house, a combined open house, where we had approximately 450 attendees to that open house, which we're pretty proud of. It's hard to get people excited about open house meetings and master plans, so we were pretty excited about the attendance that we had. So I'd like to go into just a little draft of the plan itself. The opening chapter is an introduction to community profile, and that explains how the East Bench plan fits in with existing adopted citywide plans such as Plan Salt Lake. Also provides a very brief overview of existing conditions. Didn't go into a lot of detail there because we did our very detailed existing conditions report that we released earlier to the community. The next chapter is the community vision. We have vision statements portraying what the East Bench will look like in the future, and a future land use map. This future land use map is different than what we did or what we have in some of our older master plans, but it is similar to how we've been doing our more recent master plans, such as West Salt Lake, where really the future land use map almost is more like a community character map. It tries to establish the vision for the community, but still allows flexibility for the city council to develop, in the administration, to develop zoning and policies to meet the vision without really painting ourselves into a corner by stating on the future land use map exactly what a particular zone should be at that location. Again, it's hard to remember that these are long-range plans. What we've some mistakes that we made in our older planning documents is we've actually called out this particular zone should be in place in this area. Well, we've run into issues throughout time where we've seen that our zoning changes. Sometimes a particular zone may just go away. Now we have a plan in place that says it needs to be that zone, and the zone isn't there and it causes problems. So we wanted to do this more of a vision, more of what the community would like to see happen in the future. Then the meat of the plan are the focus areas. The focus areas in the East Bench are neighborhoods, major corridors, the regional activity center, connectivity, parks, recreation, and open space. Each focus area chapter provides context on how that focus area relates to citywide planning efforts, provides a summary of the existing conditions for that focus area, and then goes into guiding principles, which are the overarching high-level guidelines for future decision-making, and then initiatives. And these are the concepts, ideas, and strategies for implementing the guiding principles. So the first focus area is creating and preserving neighborhoods. And this really recognizes that the neighborhoods in the East Bench are really the defining features of the East Bench community. And that's a lot of what we heard throughout our public engagement process, was how much people enjoy the stability of their neighborhoods, and they wanted to see that maintained. The primary aim in this focus area, in this chapter, is to maintain neighborhood character, provide places for people to interact, provide housing choices, and enhance activity nodes. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on every one of these, and we can add, if there's any questions at the end, we can get into those a little bit more in depth.
So I do have a question on the creating and preserving neighborhoods piece. One of the things that I noticed in the plan was the addition of accessory dwelling units. And I have some concerns with that because I don't think that that was ever really communicated during the open houses. And when we're talking about maintaining neighborhood character, in the community councils that I've spoken with, there are a lot of concerns about how the addition of accessory dwelling units could impact that neighborhood character. And so, you know, the question that I have is, you know, when did the administration decide to put that into the plan? And how is that going to work? Because with the accessory dwelling unit ordinance that's coming forward, I think in a couple of weeks, the East Bench is not included as an area where those would be allowed. So, you know, my question is, if we're not going to be allowing them, or if they're not added in the ordinance, and I'm not advocating that they are or that they be added to the ordinance, why have this in the master plan?
I think the key reason why we felt it was appropriate to put it in there is that primarily because of what some of our citywide policies already say about housing in particular, and the nature of the East Bench is that there are not a lot of places where we can provide housing alternatives, and an ADU provides that. And so we do feel like that it's an appropriate in the master plan, seeing that the master plan is a guide. It's going to be in place for a number of years. And even if we currently have an ordinance before the council that may limit where they can go, that doesn't mean that that's going to be in place forever. And so we want to make sure that the master plan has a longer range vision for the area to help us meet our citywide goals.
Well, one thing to add too is we were careful in the wording of that. I think if you look at the wording, we weren't recommending that they were placed everywhere. Just a blanket statement that everywhere that in the East Bench neighborhood they should be in place. What it states is that they should be located where there's transit access and near the major corridors. Now the East Bench is deficient in transit, so that's to say basically there may not be a lot of locations where they would be appropriate now, But again, this is a long-term, long-range planning document, so looking into the future. If things change in the East Bench and we get more transit and there, maybe with that, some ideas change, we have something in place to meet the citywide goals. That was our thinking.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Derek.
And from a planning perspective, aren't ADUs a great way to preserve neighborhood character while adding density? I mean, our city's growing really fast, so if we want to add people on the east side, aren't ADUs a great way to continue to preserve the character of those neighborhoods?
Yeah, they can be an effective way, depending on how they're done.
So we're going to have a very dedicated briefing on ADUs and pros and cons. I think the question that I want to follow up here is that it's not uncommon at all to have citywide plans that we lay over all of our neighborhood master plan districts. But what seems a little unusual is to call out in a neighborhood plan something pretty uniquely and specific in our housing plan. And so I think that's, I also have a similar, just reconciliation kind of concern about it, that it does feel a little unusual that we would take a neighborhood plan and insert something out of a citywide housing plan that we are still sort of tentative about, and that we generally look at as a citywide plan versus a very neighborhood specific plan.
Right. So my response to that is that part of the role of our community plans or neighborhood plans and small area plans is to identify how those plans can help the city achieve citywide goals. And so, for example, if you were to look at Plan Salt Lake, I don't think that there's a single statement in Plan Salt Lake about an ADU. I think what it says is that every part of the city should be able to provide housing options of different types and that meet different levels of affordability across the spectrum. And so in this plan, because of the limited area for redevelopment and other things, that's one way that we can help achieve that citywide goal. That's why it's identified in this plan. It's not unusual for our more geographic-based plans to bring in citywide policies and identify them. For example, we do that with almost all of our transportation policies are also reflected in our neighborhood and community plans, because it provides a little bit more context and geography to what those policies do.
Well, and so part of the discrepancy too, Nick, is a master plan that calls it out and an ordinance that doesn't. And so I mean, we're just trying to figure out what the discrepancy is here.
Right. I don't really view it as a discrepancy. I think that there are ways to achieve our goals that have to be done incrementally. And so it may be that we have proposed changes to the ADU ordinance that still limit where they go. But that doesn't mean after 10 years, say, of working with ADUs and seeing them implemented, that the city wouldn't reconsider those policies. And so it really is an incremental step. It's not like on day one the plan's adopted and we go full bore trying to implement everything in the plan right then and there. It's just not possible to do it that way.
Nick, did you have a follow-up?
I guess just one to counter that also, if it's not called out, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be allowed going forward. So at the time, if the council's interested, this language could be taken out, and you could settle on whatever is settled upon with the ADU ordinance, but that would not prohibit ADUs from going in there in 10 or 15 years if the community changes its mind and is more supportive of that at that point.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay. Go ahead. I think we stopped you mid.
No worries.
Do you remember what you were saying?
Actually, that was a great stopping point. The next focus areas are major corridors. In the East Bench, the major corridors are Foothill Drive, Parley's Way, Sunnyside Avenue, and 1300 East. And this is really where the plan, I think, is driving the most change, particularly along Foothill Drive and Parley's Way. We'll get into Parley's Way in just a bit, but the transportation elements related to Foothill Drive were used as the starting point for developing the Foothill Drive implementation plan, which is currently underway now and is being managed by the Transportation Division. The primary aim in this focus area is to move people safely and efficiently, create entryways or gateways into the city, to try to break down the perception of the streets as barriers between neighborhoods. This was kind of an important thing for community members. And provide more housing, commercial opportunities, and development that is compatible with adjacent neighborhoods. The next focus area or is the Regional Activity Center. This is really the state and federal institutions that are north of Sunnyside, as well as the Foothill Cultural District. And those of you that don't know about the Foothill Cultural District is the kind of marketing organization formed by the cultural facilities such as Hogle Zoo, This Is the Place, Red Butte Gardens, the Natural History Museum, and some of the other facilities in that area. Really, the main goal in this section is collaboration. The city has little control over what state and federal institutions do, and how they function. So really, the main goal of this focus area is to try to work together to ensure that the city's vision is being carried out in their projects. One example of that is the university has had in their plans to redevelop, in their housing plan, one of their strategies is to redevelop the university housing that's on the intersection of Sunnyside and Foothill. Well, we also happen to have in our plans the development of the, however you would like to call it, the Trans Valley Corridor, or the 9 line. And really, we'd like to work with the state, work with the university to ensure that when they redevelop their housing, that they don't turn their back on that corridor. The city is going to make a major investment along that corridor. We'd like the university to see that as an asset and also to aid in making a great place along there. Another key element of this section is to recognize the important role the Foothill Cultural District plays in the community. The Foothill Cultural District really hasn't got a lot of recognition in city plans in the past. They bring a couple million people into the East Bench community on a yearly basis. And so we have a specific section dedicated to them to recognize them and to try to find ways to help identify them in the community and placemaking there.
So, since I was somewhat critical about the ADUs, I want to thank you for the focus that you put on the Foothill Cultural District. That is something that I think is very unique, not only to the East Bench, but to Salt Lake City as a whole. You know, we're very familiar, people are very familiar with, you know, they'll talk about going to the zoo or to This Is the Place or to the Fort Douglas Museum or, you know, the Natural History Museum, something, you know, everyone talks about doing that stuff, but I don't think people have conceptualized how close all of those things are together.
Right.
And I know that the Foothill Cultural District is doing, they're working on their branding and trying to increase public awareness. And one of the things that I think would be, you know, very helpful, and I think this plan helps facilitate that, is having the city help out with some of the branding efforts, maybe along Foothill, because it really is a unique identifier to the city as a whole.
The next focus area is connecting people to places, which essentially is the transportation element of the plan. The section, the primary objective of this section is to really try to pave the way for creating a multimodal transportation system in the East Bench. The East Bench is deficient in transit. We heard that a lot from community members. I think there's a bit of a shift in thinking going on in the East Bench, where in the past maybe they looked at transit. I wouldn't say everybody, but you know, they looked at transit as something that wasn't necessarily needed up there. And we heard a lot from folks that they would like to see a lot more options in the area. So some of the primary objective is again to look at to work with the key stakeholders of the state to try to highlight the East Bench as a place where that is needed. It also identifies the need for better and more walking and bicycling routes. There's been a lot of development in the East Bench, especially in the commercial areas, that has been more automobile oriented, which is fine, but we also need to make sure that we're catering to all users of the transportation network. And the final focus area, Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. Couple things this does, it identifies there is a deficiency in parks in the East Bench, but also recognizes the fact that there's not a lot of developable land in the East Bench to try to help with that deficiency. So it makes a couple of suggestions on how to potentially fill in those gaps. Recognizes that open space areas, they're important to wildlife habitat, but also recommends that we expand our public trail system to ensure that the public can interact with nature in these areas. Also provides specific recommendations on the preservation of the foothills as an open space and recreation amenity.
So the area has a lack of acreage for open space and parks in particular, but they have some incredibly unique trail system opportunities. Did you explore in this process how to potentially increase education and access to those trail systems? I'm thinking a little bit like the McClellan Trail and some of the work the city's done there, really highlighting where the trail is and access points into the trail. Was that a consideration in this process?
Yeah, wayfinding is kind of highlighted all throughout the plan. I think, you know, especially from the mobility standpoint and the connecting people to places, that type of thing is highlighted quite a bit. I think some of the, you know, one of the biggest trail opportunity areas in the East Bench is up in the foothills. Well, we have a number of trails, but they're not always greatly defined. They're, unfortunately, what happens is that's actually outside of the city boundaries. A lot of it's in Forest Service area. And so we have highlighted that in the plan as something that we should be working on. We should be looking at working and teaming up with the Forest Service at developing an actual trail master plan for the foothills. With multi-use type pathways. I don't know if that answers your questions, but
to a degree, I do think the city has a lot more opportunity. I've been impressed with what's happening along McClellan as that's coming together, and just the signage and the access points to that trail have it's a shift, and it's in my mind a good shift, helping people identify where the trails are, where you can access them, and where they actually go once you get on them.
There are some things in the plan that talk about some of the more natural corridors through there too, and trying to find the right places for trails, particularly up to the university, so you can access the foothills and things like that, where it's not going necessarily through private property, which, you know, is unfortunately a lot of the stream corridors and stuff do in the East Bench. And
well,
so
yeah,
it's a little more
and one of the
difficult.
things, again, I keep going back to McClellan, but one of the things that's intriguing to me about it is that it's a mixture of canal and existing trail and streets and sidewalks in some cases, and so I'm wondering where the opportunities might be to sort of think outside the box around a linear park and maybe identify it as a street corridor for pedestrians, or a combination of a bike lane, street corridor, walking area. So
One of the things that I know has been discussed in the past, but I think fits with what you're talking about, is looking to see if there's some way that we can have add some continuity to the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, because right now there are sections of it that are great, but then you hit private property and you're walking along the street, and then you're back on the trail, and so that may be something worth exploring with the Forest Service, with Public Utilities, to see if there is some way that we can expand that opportunity, not necessarily, you know, in the watershed, but, you know, closer to where the trail naturally would go.
So the graphic that I actually have up there right now, I think speaks to a little bit of what both of you are saying, because this is the plan highlights the existing open space plan that was adopted in 1992. It just so happens that a lot of the corridors that are identified in the open space plan actually travel through the East Bench. We've actually put specific recommendations in the plan that relate to each one of those corridors. Bonneville Shoreline Trail is definitely one of those. We recommend, you know, trying to get the trail in places where it's on street, up into the foothills where we can. It discusses those options for the actual trail corridors themselves. So I think that might be what we're getting to. That's on page 108 of the
I can send that to the council so you can see where it's at.
So now I'd like to jump into the Parley's Way corridor plan. As I mentioned before, City Council allocated money to develop specific plans for both Parley's Way and Foothill Drive. We were able to start the Parley's Way plan while we were working on the East Bench plan, and I think that was an appropriate thing to do. The Foothill Drive plan is currently underway. That's a much more complex plan in the fact that we don't actually own the street. And there's a lot of partners involved with that, and we're actually able to get a lot of those partners to pony up some money and participate in the plan. But we do have the draft of the Parley's Way corridor plan complete. So the Parley's Way was identified as a major corridor in the East Bench plan, and the intent of the Parley's Way plan is to implement the guiding principles that are listed in the East Bench plan for major corridors. The overall concepts in the plan include creating a safe corridor for all users, creating a unique identity for the corridor, utilizing Parley's Way to connect all users to the regional transportation network, breaking down the perception of Parley's Way as a barrier between neighborhoods, and enhancing the existing nodes, the existing commercial nodes. The key recommendations in the plan are actually split into three concepts. One is corridor-wide, or all the street improvements. The second is improvements to the nodes, and the third are specific improvements to the 2300 East intersection. The corridor-wide recommendations include maintaining the current number of travel lanes, but reducing the lane width. This was important for the community. We actually, in our initial open house meetings, presented options on lane reductions. But it was very important to the community that the lanes remain open, so this operates as a major arterial. Construct wider sidewalks for pedestrians, add bike lanes, pedestrian scale lighting, planted park strips, benches, and enhanced bus stops. Some of the other key improvements.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question about that? As you know, both sides of the street there are part of my district, and one thing that I'm not seeing there that I think is worth exploring is in addition to the planted park strips, to have something there, because that is a very wide street, where you could stop safely there if you're crossing when you get halfway across. And because particularly the southbound traffic is coming off the freeway, they're in pretty fast, it takes them a while to slow down. And if it's steady, if you're there at the wrong time of day, it would be nice to have a place where you could stand safely, so that it's not just planted, so people aren't like stepping up in a planter or something, but having something that looks nice and that they could stand there. And we have the kids from Hillside and Beacon Heights who aren't supposed to cross there, but who often do, and I think it just would be helpful. And there's a crosswalk at Stringham and at Parley's Way, and I don't know, are you looking, also, this is a street question, at Stringham, if you've ever driven that, if you drive a car that's low to the ground at all, you may get high-centered there because it's such a bad dip, and I know cyclists complain about that too.
When you drive your lowrider, you get high-centered, is that what you're suggesting?
Every time. Yeah, I have to jack it up. But I don't know if that is part of, because it's up a little bit from 23rd, but if that's part of it. But I know those are things that I'm not seeing in that, particularly having that center strip be someplace where you could stay safely.
And we actually get into that, I think, a little bit more when it comes to the node recommendations.
Okay, great.
Because
Thank
the
you.
nodes,
Sorry, I got ahead.
No, that's fine. That's great. The nodes are actually located generally at those key intersections. And those are the places that we know people are, or we would like them to cross, I guess, because those are the protected intersections.
Right.
And in fact, we have in the plan for the nodes, and the nodes are 2300 East, Wyoming Street, Stringham Avenue, and Wilshire Drive. And at those particular locations, looking at signage and monuments that try to brand those nodes, and planted medians, wider sidewalks, and this is where it comes in, enhanced crosswalks at the intersections. And that could include bulb outs, that could include refuge islands. Those are some of the things that have been identified. I just kind of highlighted the top things, but those have actually been highlighted as things that could help, particularly at the 2300 East intersection,
Right.
which actually happens to be the next topic.
Right.
And at the 2300 East intersection, there were three, after looking at some other options, there were three transformations that came out. The first is just a minimum with improved crosswalks, and the second was the moderate.
I would like photocop added to that intersection.
Photocop?
Photocop, to give tickets for the people who run the light there all the time.
Okay.
Just, note that. I'm sure that won't be any big deal. Yeah, I know. I know it's not really an option, but just saying.
The moderate transformation was actually the transformation that was preferred by the community. That's where we look at actually doing curb extensions and refuge islands and things of that. This is a really busy intersection, as you know. These the distances that pedestrians have to walk across the street is ridiculously long. This happens to be a very important intersection for kids traveling back and forth to school. So the key thing with that was trying to shorten that distance for pedestrians to walk across the street. The maximum transformation was this crazy peanut-shaped roundabout scenario, which is, again, these are just concepts, so it's not, doesn't have to look like a peanut, but this is something that just
I
kind of
kind of
came
like
out.
the double circle roundabout.
Yeah,
Figure eight roundabout.
Yeah.
is like-
For what it's worth, I'd love more of that across the city.
Yeah.
That was my favorite.
And I think it's just these types of things kind of scare us in Utah right now. But the way that this has been looked at is that these can kind of transform through time, with minimal amounts of money, or I shouldn't say minimal, but for a lesser amount of money, the minimum transportation improvements or crosswalk improvements could take place, which could pave the way for the moderate improvements, which then long-term, we could potentially look at this maximum kind of full reconfiguration of the.
Guys, a quick question about Parley's, et cetera. Give me a sense of the scale of traffic on that compared to other streets I might be more aware of in the city.
Parley's is not a crowded street.
I say, I'm trying to get a sense of the load compared to other places, because I don't think it's very crowded compared to the size of it. And
It is not. It's a huge street. It's very wide. We've got the numbers. I can get you numbers. I don't necessarily have them on hand, but
comparable to other streets across the city. Any sense of that?
I'm not even sure if it's that comparable to very many streets on how wide it is and how much traffic it carries.
Yeah.
It doesn't carry a lot of traffic. One of the problems with Parley's, it is so wide and it doesn't carry a lot of traffic that people drive extremely fast. So it wasn't, when we're talking to the community, the number of cars wasn't really the issue. It was the speed of the cars traveling down the street that was the issue. The beauty of Parley's is that we as the city own the street. It's a gateway coming into the city. And it really, and we have a lot of room to work, which means this could really be kind of kind of a flagship, I guess, or kind of a good pilot project for transforming a street into a gateway. We've already done that with North Temple, but it could be just from the East Bench. This could be something that we could head up Foothill Drive is another one, but Foothill Drive is a different animal.
Well, and this is my area, obviously, but having that much space and having lack of open space just screams to me, can you make that into a very unique linear park transit corridor kind of way? And it's ambitious, I get it, and I understand why people are scared about the peanut roundabout concept, but lacking open space and having control over a low-density sort of traffic area with that much land mass is pretty cool. Possibilities of this, at least. Plus the views are phenomenal over Salt Lake City in the valley.
Where's the width change going west? Is it 23rd where the road narrows? Because as you get closer to Sugar House, it's considerably narrower.
It does. It still maintains the same number of travel lanes.
Right,
In each direction. It just, it narrows down.
Yeah, once you hit 23rd East, it narrows into a very tight, 4 lanes.
Mr. Chair, I think that I'm remembering Charlie bringing up the Hoberman Arch years ago. Remember, Charlie, when it was garaged?
Before it was lost.
Yeah.
Parts.
Yeah, and we were like, we should find a place to put our peanut. Is our Olympic glory gateway to the city park.
Yeah.
I'm only half joking.
And there's a really neat monument.
Yeah, the Parley P. Pratt Monument right
that's
there.
there on that
Would
intersection.
be really cool in
And
the
it's
middle.
really, it's kind of, I think it gets lost in what happens there. And so that was one of the ideas too, is to, that intersection, is to actually bump that out and then move that monument more so it's a little bit more prominent in that location. So that's kind of my brief
Questions?
overview of the plan.
Comments?
Just a comment, another comment. I'm very, very happy to see this coming to this point. It has been long in the works. The community has been very patient, but anxious as well. So I just want to thank you all for the work that you've done on this. It really is a good plan, and it's good to have it done. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next week on our consent agenda in our formal meeting, we'll be setting a public hearing date for the 17th. On the 17th, I'm sorry, for the 7th of February. And then we have this tentatively scheduled for action on the 21st of February. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last item on our agenda is the Northwest Quadrant. And I have a whole list of names here, so I'm not sure who's actually joining us. I've got David and Mike Reberg, but also Lynn and Laura and Nick. And Nick, are you just going to stay there?
I might as well just stay here all night.
So anyone who thinks they're speaking in this section, come on up. Laura, are you taking the lead on this? Sure, why not?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Tell us where we are.
Absolutely. Well, I think it would be appropriate to start with planning, since we plan, and then we implement.
That's right.
So let's start with planning.
All right. So I'll just go over briefly some of the zoning, the Northwest Quadrant zoning that we're working on. So the Northwest Quadrant zoning consists of 3 parts right now. So the first part is writing the zoning for the area north of I-80. So that involves mostly amending the existing M1 zone to address some of the concerns of the lands that abut the natural areas. The second component is amending the AG agricultural zone and to remove the residential uses from the zone. And the third component is to amend the lowland conservancy overlay. The first 2 are in process right now. With the existing M1 zone, the majority of changes will be made to the light industrial area, and it'll just mostly address the area north of I-80, so it would not affect the area south of I-80. And then we'll also have some additional requirements for the areas that abut the natural areas. So some things that we're thinking about are requiring native landscaping north of I-80, also prohibiting uplighting, requiring treatments for glass to prevent bird collisions, and then updating the land use tables in the M1 chapter. And with that, and with those two areas, we have a briefing with the Planning Commission tomorrow, and we have an open house scheduled for next week, and then we're also coordinating with the whole economic vision plan to make sure that this process and the economic process supports each other. So, and we're looking at having a Planning Commission hearing probably sometime in February or March, just depending on how things go, and then at that point that would be transmitted to council.
Your expectation to make modifications to existing zones or to create a new zone?
So yeah, so we did look at the different options of either creating a new zone or amending an existing zone, and what we were looking at was basically very similar to M1. So we just making that tweak to the M1 section was a lot easier than creating a whole new.
So my
zone.
concern about that is that we still, I mean, we've changed a lot of the M1 zone and that's closer into the city, but there's still some existing. And so have we done an assessment of what impact changes would have on the existing M1?
Right, so the changes we're making are going to be specific to the area in the northwest quadrant, so they wouldn't apply to the other
It'd be
M1 property.
M1 dash
It's M1,
A or B.
No,
or
it's still M1, it's just there's specific provisions that apply to a certain geography.
Okay, so you're thinking of a geographic overlay.
It's so technically it's not an overlay. I mean, you could look at it that way, but we have the M1 zone, and it's relatively unchanged. There's additional standards being added to the M1 zone that only apply to the area north of I-80.
Okay. And so at one point, a couple years ago, in one of the early proposals, there was a ecological zone that got a lot of flack because people thought it meant you had to be an ecological industrial building, but what it really was designed to do was encourage sort of forward-thinking development, solar implementation of water conservation, that sort of thing. Is that stuff you're considering still as part of that area? You mentioned lights, you mentioned birds. I'm just wondering about that. We were talking at one time about the opportunity to provide a really unique place for a certain kind of industry to incentivize, not to be exclusive, but to incentivize.
Right, and I think some of the stuff that Laura Fritz and Public Utilities is working on can address that. We wanted to make sure that one of our goals working with both of those entities is to make sure that zoning is not prohibiting that, and that there's other tools in place to help encourage that type of.
And I'm sorry, council members, does anybody have questions so far? I'm just plowing through this, but I am concerned that I keep hearing rumors about a tank farm in this area that's pretty ecologically sensitive. Would either of these zones allow that?
No, that's something that would only be allowed in the M2 or M2 zone, and we're not looking at that.
All right, thanks. A tank farm, a petroleum tank farm, a refinery tank farm. There's been a lot of talk about storing crude out there for processing at the refineries, which is
You're
concerning.
talking about south of I-80 or north of I-80?
North of I-80.
Okay.
By west, north and west, sort of landfill area, north of landfill, sort of.
Okay.
Okay. Heads up.
Good to know, thank you.
And then in addition, so with the AG zone, right now, under the current ordinance, the AG zone would allow 10,000 square foot single-family lots. So with the petition that we have right now, there is a hold on any residential applications in the AG zone. But that section of these Northwest Quadrant zoning changes is fairly simple. We'll just be removing the residential components, and I believe there's a group home component within the land use tables. And then with that, and then the third aspect of it, the lowland conservancy overlay, there's been a lot of concerns about the effectiveness of it, if it's addressing what it should be addressing, and we are actually waiting. Public Utilities should have a master drainage plan complete by March or so we're waiting for that to determine kind of what and if changes need to be made to that zone. Anything to add? So that's what we have for the zoning aspect of this.
So from the Economic Development Department standpoint, we are utilizing the redevelopment agency to do an economic vision report for the Northwest Quadrant. The goal of this report is to evaluate the type, intensity, and phasing of development possible in the Northwest Quadrant. We think that that's very important as we look to the future of what can be developed out on the Northwest Quadrant. That being said, we have started this process. We've engaged over 100 stakeholders in a series of roundtables, and those roundtables were experts involved in economic development, infrastructure, industrial property development, property owners, and sustainability. So we really tried to cover the gamut of the different types of stakeholders that would be involved. So tomorrow, we're gathering 100 stakeholders back together to see the first response from Jones Lang LaSalle, who is our consultant on this economic vision. And what we're looking for from that is some understanding of what the market looks like for the Northwest Quadrant. And we're going to be presenting that formally to the RDA board on January 17th. So we're looking forward to sharing what we've learned.
Questions, comments? I have a couple of questions. I mean, about anything in the Northwest Quadrant? So I have a couple of questions. I want to know if we're at a stage so far where we're addressing potential reclamation at the landfill and what we're doing there and how that works in the zoning. And I'm seeing Lynn, that's a Lynn Pace question, I'm guessing, but before Lynn comes up, the other question I have is related to a pretty significant biking corridor out there and how that's getting incorporated in your discussions, and if those people are some of your stakeholders. I'm just wondering about, because there's a lot of concern about how development, in particular access off the freeway, might interface or interfere with a traditional, pretty clear and open biking corridor.
So one part of this that hasn't been discussed yet is the roads. And I know that transportation is, we know that there's two main roads that are going to be constructed relatively quick. And during that construction, it obviously is going to impact the frontage road. But long term, transportation is trying to figure out the best road network for the area and making sure that they're addressing those things that are identified in the master plan, such as preserving that recreation corridor along the frontage road.
And so I'm also wondering if that might be an RDA opportunity to reinforce a recreation corridor as part of that RDA potential project. So I just want to keep it on the radar there. Charlie, did you have any?
No, I mean, mine was basically about the landfill as well. And I know that there has been quite a few discussions about that, and I'm just wondering where we are.
Sorry, would you restate the question, please?
Lynn Pace.
Yes, where are we in the process of figuring out what to do with the landfill? I know that there are, I guess that if you could talk about what our specific liability is as the former operator of the landfill, who currently owns the landfill, and the size and some of the estimates on cleanup and what could end up impacting a lot of this project.
The landfill is 700 plus acres. I forget what the exact number is. It is owned by a subsidiary of the LDS Church Suburban Land Reserve. It was closed as a landfill in 1979 or 1980, somewhere in that range, and has been sitting since then. There has been, from time to time, been dialogue about, well, what if, in terms of cleaning it and what could be done if it were cleaned. I think those discussions have sort of come and gone over the years. I think there has been a renewed interest in and a sort of heightened discussion of those issues because of the activity with the prison, and because there will be roads and utilities in the area, and because we expect to see development interest in the area. And there, depending on whether you're on the development side or the landowner side, either way, there's, I think, an enhanced level of activity and interest in the area that may provide either a greater likelihood that someone will force the cleanup, or a greater willingness to assemble partners who might be willing to participate in making that possible. As to the liability issues, I'll leave those to the attorneys. Well, yes, but I promised them when I left the attorney's office that I wouldn't continue to act as city attorney when I wasn't hired to do so.
It's probably safe to say we have some liability.
Generally speaking, there is the first people that they would look to for a cleanup would be owners and operators. And so that's where they would start, and then liability would sort of trickle down from there to anyone else who may have had a role in it or been responsible for waste or things like that. If you want a detailed discussion about the legal issues and the liabilities, I would suggest that you do that in a different setting where you can ask a range of more detailed questions. But the challenge at this point is that no one really has and it's not to say that studies haven't been done, but there have been studies done as to the landfill, you know, how deep, how much, how bad, all those sort of things. But no one has meaningful numbers as to what it would cost to remediate the landfill, or realistic estimates as to what the land might be worth once you finish. And given that you're bringing somewhere in the range of 3,000 or 4,000 acres on the market, you know, dumping a lot of inventory on the market does not increase demand. And so all of those are variables that we don't control, and they're hard to quantify. And so while there has been quite a bit of discussion about what could occur if you clean the landfill property, bear in mind that the current state prison site is 700 acres in Draper. This site is 700 acres in the Northwest Quadrant. So it's a very large parcel of property, close to the freeway, close to the airport, et cetera. But the estimates in terms of the cost and liability and the complexity of the cleanup are vary so widely that it's been hard to sort of pin that down as to what's a realistic possibility. So that's been the nature of the discussion. I expect there will be more, and where that will end up, I would be speculating at this point. But
Aaron.
I want to hear Laura talk.
Oh, you want me? Well, so we are continuing substantial coordination with the state on the sequencing and implementation of design for water and sewer systems through the main transmission lines. We are also working with the state on the preparation of a stormwater master plan that should be completed next month. And then also the state is finishing up a floodplain analysis, which will also be important for us in the drainage side. And then finally, a cooperative agreement is underway. We're working with the attorney's office to really refine and nail down the agreement of repayment from the city to the state for betterments and for master plan projects. Additionally, we will be working with one of our outside consultants on a feasibility analysis of renewable energy for our infrastructure, because as we looked more deeply into it, we had some questions about what are the possible opportunities with, for instance, our sewer infrastructure. How would that be implemented? Are there downsides to that? So for instance, what we realized is that we need the heat from our sewer system to operate our digester plant at the wastewater treatment facility. If we remove heat from the system, we're going to be using more energy at the wastewater treatment plant, which I think would be a negative consequence. So we want to understand what our options are. Is there an option for us to generate renewable energy at the wastewater treatment plant itself, actually, as part of the outfall? So we want to look a little bit more deeply, a little bit more broadly, but stay within the the intention of making sure we're looking at different types of sustainability options. Green infrastructure is another piece that we're looking at as well.
Questions for Laura?
I have a comment
Yes.
that I like the way that we're hearing from, we aren't having a siloed approach, and we can't afford to in the timeline that we're working on, but good job working together on your different approaches and making sure that they work together, not just youth for, but the plans themselves. And I wanted to reiterate something that I think we talked about over a year ago maybe, and it's in the transportation department, but I see Kevin back there, so I have to say it, that I think it would be really neat to take an aviation theme to this area. This is, you know, a migratory bird pathway, and we've got Rose Park shaped like roses, and we've got the International Center named after pilots for its proximity to the airport, and I think that it would be cool to name streets in this area after migratory birds, and to, if there is some kind of a way to build that theme into this new district with the eco approach that we're taking, and a nod to that ancient migratory pathway that still exists. Pretty cool. Thanks.
Okay, any other comments? I do have one, maybe two, Lynn. Rail, has there been a conversation of rail as part of the infrastructure to provide fill for the prison? And I know that's an economic development question related to potential shipping in the area down the road.
Yes, there has been lots of, excuse me, lots of discussion, mostly by rail providers, to say that it would be really good to use rail to bring in all of the fill material they need for the prison. The state of Utah has done their own investigation and analysis and said, great idea, not gonna happen. Meaning, they don't think it is economically beneficial for them to bring in their fill material by rail. So that's as to the prison project.
Right,
State
and
has
that's
determined they don't want it, don't need it. Now,
that's the
that
challenge we have with
that does
all
not
these
answer the
conversations.
question.
Yeah.
Does not answer the question as to what rail corridors we want or need for future development within the Northwest Quadrant as part of a transportation network grid, you know.
So what my question is not related to what rail we want. My question is related to the leveraging of an opportunity that we're already going to have to bring fill in, and a duplication of paying for fill by truck than starting from scratch with rail. And is there an opportunity to have a conversation with the state? And I know it's bigger than the prison relocation group, but is there an opportunity for them to partner on that?
Is there an opportunity? I guess I would answer, I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that when we have approached the state, they have said, we're not interested, doesn't meet our needs. If you want to do rail, have at it.
Seems like a really exceptional long-term economic development opportunity. That's why I'm wondering, because they seem to have a lot of interest in the long-term return on this area. So
yeah, and part of that may be, and I don't know that, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but you know, if the state is the overall organization, there's one group that is tasked with building the prison, and there's maybe another group or another group of people who have an interest in the broader economic development, and the people who have the responsibility to build the prison and to make sure it gets done on time and within budget don't want to be burdened with the costs and delays of cleaning a landfill or bringing in rail
or talking to their
or other things that don't help
equivalents
their
at the
project,
state. Yeah. Okay.
but may in fact slow them down and make it more expensive. So
or suggest anything so insensitive as I just did, but the reality is they don't talk well with each other.
I didn't say that,
Yeah,
but
I know I said you didn't say that.
But it may be an element that there are different motivations for different groups within the state. So
very well said politically. Any additional comments or questions? All right, thank you all very much. We'll see you again, I'm sure. We have a few announcements. We're going to adjourn just in just a few minutes here, with a reminder that we're convening downstairs with our legislators at 5:30. It's actually in the cafe downstairs. Cindy.
First item is the retreat or workshop, annual workshop for the City Council. It is scheduled tentatively for the 24th of January. And we need to check with you to see if you prefer that to be from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. or whether you would prefer it go noon to 5. So roughly 4 or 5 hours, but morning or afternoon. Okay, 2 prefer afternoon.
You're okay either?
Want to go to a matinee that day? Fine with afternoon.
Okay. All right, afternoon. And then the other item is that the National League of Cities conference in Washington, D.C., that's the time where council members have the opportunity to work with our lobbyist, Len Simon, to visit elected officials on Capitol Hill. We need to get those reservations made. I believe it's the 11th of March. Sorry, I've lost my document. It is the 11th through the 15th of March.
Yeah, I can go.
Okay.
Usually I can't because they usually do it at the end of the session, but.
I want to go. So, like Derek, Aaron.
I'm in.
Charlie. No, Lisa, probably not me. I'll let
Okay.
So we need to start those arrangements
Okay,
quickly.
that's correct. Mhm. All right.
All right.
So you know, I'm here.
NARO, it's a housing conference. Yeah. But we can spell that out. All right, that's it.
That's it. All right.